What's up, guys? BTS built HYBE from a struggling agency into a global titan. They're the untouchable kings, right? But hold on to your seats because a massive rumor is exploding. Is HYBE actually furious with BTS? What could possibly fracture K-pop's strongest bond? Are the members finally pushing creative boundaries the corporation simply can't control? Or is a hidden war brewing behind closed doors? Today, we dive into the shocking reality behind this industry earthquake. Ready? Number 7. J-Hope, shattering the golden idol illusion. When you think of J-Hope, your brain instantly paints the picture of pure sunshine, radiant smiles, flawless choreography, and the ultimate mood maker of BTS. But behind the glittering corporate curtain of HYBE, Jungkook was quietly preparing an artistic rebellion that would catch the entire boardroom completely off guard. For nearly a decade, Big Hit Entertainment, and subsequently the multi-billion-dollar corporate juggernaut known as HYBE, built an empire on meticulously crafted concepts where every single comeback, hair color, visual aesthetic, and thematic narrative was polished to perfection by focus groups, creative directors, and high-level marketing executives. The BTS formula was golden, lucrative, and seemingly unbreakable, generating billions of won with every release. So when Chapter 2 of BTS was officially announced in mid-2022, corporate executives naturally expected the first solo pioneer to play it safe by releasing radio-friendly, ultra-commercial bubblegum pop that would easily slide onto mainstream playlists. Instead, J-Hope walked into the planning rooms with the raw, gritty, and dark industrial concept of his debut solo studio album, Jack in the Box, effectively tossing the pristine idol blueprint straight into the shredder and sending shockwaves through the executive corridors. Can you imagine the sheer panic of corporate suits when their brightest commercial superstar suddenly demanded to strip away the glossy pop varnish and dive headfirst into 90s old-school boom-bap hip-hop, grotesque clown symbolism, and existential themes of burning ambition, self-destruction, and identity crisis? J-Hope wasn't just asking for creative freedom, he was unapologetically taking full executive control over his artistic destiny, choosing not to release physical CD copies in the traditional format, a direct blow to standard K-pop album sales tactics, and instead pushing for eco-friendly digital platform versions that challenged the very core of HYBE's chart-dominating sales algorithms. Behind closed doors, this move caused massive friction because mass album sales have always been the lifeblood of K-pop stock valuations. And here was a core BTS member voluntarily sacrificing first-week million-seller accolades just to make an ethical and artistic statement against mass consumerism. But Hoseok didn't stop there. Rather than waiting for HYBE's conventional PR machinery to orchestrate a standard music show promotional tour, he took matters entirely into his own hands by organizing a legendary private pre-release listening party at the HYBE headquarters rooftop, bringing together underground hip-hop veterans, rival agency artists, top-tier actors, and independent musicians, a move that completely dismantled the traditional, heavily guarded K-pop tribalism that major agencies like HYBE had maintained for decades. Industry insiders noted that HYBE executives were sweating bullets as photos and videos flooded social media, completely uncontrolled by corporate press releases, proving that the members wielded far more cultural influence and networking power than the company itself. Then came the ultimate trial, Lollapalooza 2022 in Chicago, where J-Hope made history as the very first South Korean artist to headline a major American music festival. Insiders whispered that corporate managers were terrified of the sheer logistical and reputational gamble of putting a single idol on a massive global rock and alternative stage without the safety net of his 6 brothers. Yet J-Hope commanded a crowd of over 100,000 roaring festival-goers for an hour and a half of pure, unfiltered live hip-hop fury, proving that his artistic vision didn't need corporate micromanagement to succeed. This undeniable triumph was a double-edged sword for HYBE's top brass. On one hand, it generated unprecedented global prestige, but on the other, it cemented a terrifying precedent for the corporation, the realization that the individual members of BTS had officially outgrown the company's ability to direct their artistic identities, sparking whispers of frustration among executives who realized they could no longer dictate the narrative of their biggest cash cow. J-Hope showed the entire world that behind the polished idol mask was a fearless, autonomous artist who wasn't afraid to burn down the golden cage of expectation, leaving corporate strategists scrambling to rethink how much freedom they could actually afford to give their superstar roster. Number 6. RM, the intellectual defiance against corporate greed. When Kim Namjoon, globally revered as RM and the fiercely intellectual, undeniably charismatic leader of BTS, began meticulously shaping his solo narrative, the tension within the glossy, high-rise executive suites of HYBE Corporation became absolutely palpable because, unlike the easily marketable and trend-chasing pop paradigms that the company aggressively pushed to maximize quarterly profits and appease demanding shareholders, Namjoon was orchestrating a deeply philosophical, uncompromisingly honest artistic rebellion that completely shunned the conventional K-pop machinery. For nearly a decade, RM carried the monumental, back-breaking weight of being the designated spokesperson, the diplomatic shield, and the intellectual anchor for a group that practically built HYBE from a near-bankrupt, struggling underdog agency operating out of a cramped, leaky basement into an unstoppable, monopolistic global entertainment empire valued at billions of dollars. He was the one pushed to the front lines to deliver flawless, eloquent speeches at the United Nations, to stand poised and diplomatic at the White House addressing anti-Asian hate crimes, and to flawlessly navigate aggressive Western media interviews in his second language, all while the corporate entity heavily monetized this immense prestige and marketed him as the ultimate golden boy of global diplomacy. But as the company rapidly expanded its tentacles, ruthlessly acquiring rival agencies, controversially delving into highly criticized ventures like NFTs, launching experimental AI voice projects, and clearly prioritizing aggressive hyper-capitalist tech expansions over genuine musical artistry, a quiet but profound ideological rift began to tear between the company's ruthless boardroom and the poetic soul of its founding artist. The shocking reality of this internal, silent friction became glaringly obvious to industry insiders and deeply observant fans with the release of his critically acclaimed, genre-defying solo studio album, Indigo, and subsequently the phenomenally raw, fiercely experimental masterpiece, Right Place, Wrong Person, projects that utterly defied and effectively dismantled every single metric of HYBE's algorithmic chart targeting strategies by deliberately ignoring the viral, mind-numbing TikTok dance challenge culture, the easily digestible, repetitive English pop hooks, and the heavily manufactured fan meeting spectacles that corporate investors practically demand as standard operating procedure. Instead of playing the obedient idol game, Namjoon boldly locked himself in independent, dimly lit studios with a radically diverse array of underground indie musicians, alternative R&B pioneers, and highly revered Korean contemporary artists, intentionally curating museum-level, culturally rich exhibitions and intimate, deeply acoustic live performances at tiny, prestigious art galleries like the Dia Beacon in New York, a bold move that reportedly sent corporate marketing executives into a dizzying panic because you simply cannot easily mass-produce, commodify, or sell randomized photo cards based on profound existential introspection and high art concepts. Imagine the absolute frustration and quiet fury of HYBE's financial directors and top-tier managers, who were undoubtedly and desperately hoping for another massive global pop smash hit in the veins of Butter or Dynamite to keep their aggressive revenue streams flowing, only to be handed an intensely personal, sonically complex, and lyrically dense record that openly critiqued the suffocating nature of global fame, the agonizing loss of human connection in our increasingly digital age, and the exhausting, soul-crushing reality of being treated as a mere cog in a massive, profit-driven corporate machine. In his deeply emotional track Wildflower, he explicitly poured his heart out, confessing his desperate yearning to be a quiet, grounded wildflower rather than a blinding, explosive firework that inevitably burns out in the sky. A stunningly beautiful but painfully sharp critique of the fleeting, destructive nature of superstar fame that HYBE so desperately forces upon its artists. Namjoon's uncompromising artistic choices were essentially a massive silent middle finger to the very industry standard that his own company was trying to ruthlessly optimize and export worldwide, prioritizing long-lasting cultural legacy, raw authenticity, and deep emotional resonance over the cheap, fleeting dopamine rush of Billboard Hot 100 manipulation and manufactured streaming records. And this intellectual autonomy deeply unsettled the executives who slowly realized that their most articulate, influential leader was practically educating the entire massive global fandom to value real, unadulterated art over mass-produced corporate products. But the intense friction didn't just stop at his musical direction and aesthetic choices. RM's notoriously outspoken nature regarding the relentless, physically destroying and mentally draining pace of the K-pop idol industry itself, famously and heartbreakingly expressing during the emotional 2022 Festa dinner that the rigorous, unforgiving system simply does not give artists the necessary time to mature, reflect, or even exist as normal human beings, was a devastatingly candid exposure of the dark reality behind HYBE's immaculate, heavily guarded PR facade. This deeply vulnerable confession essentially pulled back the heavy velvet curtain on the exhausting, factory-like assembly line of endless content creation that the company heavily relied upon to keep its stock prices artificially inflated and its investors satisfied. This unprecedented level of emotional transparency from the group's ultimate leader reportedly sent massive shockwaves of panic and fury through the highest levels of the corporate hierarchy, as executives scrambled frantically behind the scenes to do immediate damage control, desperately trying to reframe his heartbreakingly honest confession about profound artistic burnout as a mere temporary break or a new chapter to avoid a catastrophic stock market crash, proving just how terrifyingly dependent the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate truly was on the silent, unwavering compliance of its overworked artists. Furthermore, as HYBE later found itself deeply embroiled in messy, highly publicized corporate civil wars, vicious internal power struggles, and nasty boardroom disputes with subsidiary labels like Adore in the years that followed, Namjoon maintained a stoic, impenetrable, and highly strategic silence, absolutely refusing to let himself or his beloved brothers be weaponized as corporate pawns, PR shields, or leverage for the executive's greedy, ego-driven power struggles, choosing instead to quietly and honorably enlist in the military, serve his country with dignity in a military band, and let his complex, anti-pop music loudly speak for his true character. Even his pre-enlistment schedule was a massive testament to his quiet rebellion. Rather than embarking on a massive, highly monetizable global solo stadium tour that would have undoubtedly raked in hundreds of millions of dollars for the company, he focused his immense wealth and global platform on philanthropy, quietly donating millions of won to cultural heritage foundations, passionately advocating for the preservation of ancient Korean art, and solidifying his untouchable status as a genuine cultural ambassador rather than a mere cash-generating entertainer. By actively and brilliantly distancing his unparalleled legacy from HYBE's increasingly controversial and aggressive business practices, and relentlessly pursuing an artistic path that successfully elevated him from a highly manufactured K-pop idol to a globally respected contemporary artist, profound thinker, and societal critic, RM effectively stripped the massive entertainment company of its absolute ability to control his personal narrative and commercial output. This brilliant, quiet rebellion left the corporate executives to silently seethe in their high-rise offices at the daunting realization that the brilliant, visionary kid from Ilsan, who originally put them on the map and handed them the keys to a global empire, had completely and permanently transcended their corporate grasp, firmly proving once and for all that true transcendent art and a brilliant mind simply cannot be chained, dictated, or permanently controlled by a greedy shareholder's bottom line. Number 5. Jin, shattering the corporate chessboard on his own terms. When the multi-billion-dollar empire of HYBE was frantically playing high-stakes geopolitical and financial chess behind closed doors, treating the 7 members like pristine, untouchable corporate assets on a quarterly balance sheet, nobody in the boardroom truly anticipated that the oldest, seemingly most lighthearted and carefree member of the group, Kim Sok-jin, would be the one to deliver a masterclass in autonomous defiance that would completely overturn the company's carefully orchestrated corporate strategy. For years, the global media and the South Korean National Assembly were engulfed in an agonizing, endlessly protracted debate regarding whether BTS should be granted a special military exemption or alternative service due to their staggering multi-billion-dollar contributions to South Korea's national economy and global soft power. Behind the scenes, HYBE executives were actively and desperately lobbying and leaning into this legislative ambiguity, subtly using the prolonged uncertainty during shareholder meetings to prevent catastrophic stock market plunges, essentially dangling the hope of continuous group activities in front of nervous Wall Street and Yoido investors while keeping the members caught in a suffocating, highly politicized public crossfire, where malicious critics accuse them of trying to dodge their civic duty. The mental and emotional toll on the members was immense, as they were repeatedly forced to endure vicious public scrutiny while corporate executives casually discussed their mandatory service as a mere business risk factor in financial disclosure reports. But Kim Sok-jin was done being a silent pawn on an executive chessboard. In October 2022, right after the historic and emotionally charged Yet to Come concert in Busan, which HYBE had heavily leveraged for the World Expo bid, Jin took complete, unapologetic control of the narrative. Without waiting for corporate spin doctors to soften the blow for stock markets, the announcement dropped that Jin had officially revoked his request to postpone his mandatory military service and was preparing to enlist as an active-duty frontline soldier immediately. The decision sent immediate chaotic shockwaves throughout HYBE's executive towers, triggering a sharp dip in stock prices and sending public relations executives into a frantic frenzy because Jin had fundamentally dismantled their multi-year corporate stalling tactic in a single decisive stroke of unyielding personal dignity and integrity. By choosing to step up and serve without asking for political favors or corporate shielding, Jin stripped HYBE of its ability to use their enlistment timeline as speculative investor leverage, proving that his personal honor, duty to his country, and love for his brothers were infinitely more important than corporate market capitalizations and shareholder appeasement. But this fearless display of independence was not an isolated incident in Jin's quiet rebellion against HYBE's rigid corporate mold. Throughout his career, Jin has consistently and hilariously weaponized an unfiltered, chaotic, and fiercely authentic personality to actively dismantle the stiff, hyper-controlled corporate PR protocols that HYBE painstakingly enforces on its talent roster. While corporate media trainers constantly instruct K-pop idols to remain perpetually polite, robotic, and strictly scripted in public appearances, Jin routinely broke every unwritten rule in the corporate handbook, famously cutting his own hair with kitchen scissors on live broadcasts to the sheer horror of company stylists, openly roasting the agency's bizarre decisions during live streams, and boldly telling millions of viewers that he does not fear corporate reprimands because he is an equal partner in the brand's success. When it came time to introduce his solo artistic identity to the world with the release of the celestial, deeply emotional anthem The Astronaut, co-written with legendary British rock band Coldplay, HYBE's commercial team likely envisioned a prolonged, aggressively monetized global promotional campaign packed with exhausting media junkets and endless product integrations. Instead, Jin chose raw emotional impact and artistic sincerity over commercial exploitation. He took a grueling 30-hour commercial flight all the way to Buenos Aires, Argentina, solely to perform the song live just once alongside Chris Martin in front of 70,000 roaring fans at the Estadio River Plate, a performance so pure, transcendent, and profoundly moving that it served as the ultimate heartfelt goodbye gift to Army before his enlistment, completely bypassing the conventional, profit-maximizing K-pop promotional cycle. Furthermore, rather than chasing high-fashion luxury contracts or sterile corporate television appearances during his pre-enlistment solo window, Jin deliberately chose to appear on chaotic, unscripted indie web programs, such as Lee Young-ji's legendary drinking show No Prepare, where he drank openly, laughed without restraint, and candidly exposed the extreme isolation, profound social sacrifices, and lack of ordinary human relationships that come with astronomical global fame, effectively tearing down the artificial fantasy of effortless glamour that HYBE's marketing machine works around the clock to sell to the public. He even spent his precious personal time learning the ancient delicate art of traditional Korean alcohol brewing directly from master artisan Park Rock-dam, actively pursuing passion projects and cultural heritage preservation entirely outside the corporate ecosystem. Jin's refusal to conform to the sanitized, hyper-curated idol prototype has long been a source of quiet frustration for corporate executives who prefer predictable, easily manageable brand ambassadors. But it is precisely this fearless, self-directed authenticity that makes him an untouchable cultural icon. When Jin completed his military service in June 2024 as an exemplary elite soldier and assistant instructor, he immediately demonstrated that his fierce devotion was strictly to the fans and his brothers rather than corporate convenience. Organizing a massive, deeply personal hug event for 1,000 fans just 24 hours after his discharge, completely brushing aside the usual hyper-commercialized comeback spectacles. By operating with unwavering moral clarity, razor-sharp wit, and complete indifference to corporate anxiety, Kim Sok-jin proved once and for all that while HYBE may hold the contracts, he holds the true power over his own destiny, standing tall as the unshakable cornerstone of BTS who will never allow corporate greed to compromise his principles or dictate the terms of his life and art. Number 4. Suga, the uncensored rebel tearing down the idol facade. When evaluating the sheer, unadulterated friction between the polished, heavily sanitized corporate machinery of HYBE and the raw, unfiltered artistic souls of its artists, one simply cannot ignore the blazing inferno that is Min Yoongi, globally feared and revered as Suga, and his fiercely independent, unapologetically savage alter ego, August D, who has consistently acted as a massive, defiant middle finger to the rigid expectations of the K-pop idol industry. For a multi-billion-dollar entertainment conglomerate that thrives on meticulously manufactured public images, pristine behavioral protocols, and easily digestible pop anthems designed to safely appease investors and broad consumer demographics, having an in-house genius producer who openly writes scathing, expletive-laden lyrical masterpieces about the suffocating nature of capitalism, corporate greed, and the superficiality of the music industry is an absolute logistical nightmare for high-level public relations executives. While HYBE's aggressive expansion strategies have increasingly focused on creating highly controlled synthetic AI artists, standardized idol group formulas, and algorithmic chart manipulation, Yoongi has been violently pulling in the exact opposite direction, transforming his deeply personal pain and underground hip-hop roots into a weaponized discography that absolutely refuses to be tamed, censored, or corporatized. This silent but explosive corporate tension reached an absolute boiling point with the highly anticipated release of his magnum opus, the D-Day studio album, and the accompanying cinematic masterpiece of a music video for the title track Haegim, where Yoongi casually shattered every single unwritten rule of the Korean Idol handbook by aggressively smoking, drinking, and portraying a literal bloody execution of his own alternate personas on screen, forcing HYBE's conservative management to reckon with an artistic vision so gritty, violent, and unapologetically adult that it completely alienated the family-friendly demographic the company tries so desperately to court. But the true terror for the corporate boardroom wasn't just the aesthetic rebellion, it was the harrowing, deeply vulnerable emotional truth exposed in tracks like Amygdala, where Yoongi fearlessly stripped away the glittering illusion of superstardom to confront his most agonizing, traumatic life experiences, including the devastating motorcycle accident that shattered his shoulder during his pre-debut days as a poverty-stricken delivery boy, his mother's heart surgery, and his father's battle with cancer, laying his raw psychological scars bare for the entire world to witness. By forcing HYBE to attach age restrictions and trauma trigger warnings to a core BTS member's official music video, Yoongi effectively forced the ultimate hyper-capitalist pop machine to publicly acknowledge the agonizing, blood-stained human cost of their industry, completely dismantling the toxic, flawless fantasy that K-pop agencies rely upon to sell an unattainable dream to vulnerable teenagers. Furthermore, instead of engaging in standard company-controlled promotional cycles on network television music shows, where artists are treated like obedient props, Yoongi audaciously bypassed the entire traditional media broadcasting system by launching his own deeply intimate, fiercely independent, alcohol-infused talk show, Suchwita, directly from the raw comfort of his own studio environment. By personally curating a legendary guest list that included veteran hip-hop legends, rival agency executives, and independent actors, and engaging them in raw, unscripted, deeply philosophical conversations about the severe mental health toll of the entertainment industry, while casually sharing bottles of high-end whiskey, Yoongi effectively built his own autonomous media empire that completely stripped HYBE's ability to heavily edit, sanitize, or control his narrative. He created a revolutionary safe haven where the biggest stars in Asia could finally speak like real, flawed human beings rather than programmed corporate robots, proving that authentic human connection generates infinitely more cultural impact than millions of dollars spent on manufactured corporate content. Beyond his own solo endeavors, Yoongi's staggering success as an independent, highly sought-after producer for massive global artists entirely outside of HYBE's corporate umbrella, crafting chart-topping, critically acclaimed masterpieces for industry titans like IU, Psy, and Epic High, solidified his status as an untouchable musical powerhouse who fundamentally does not need his agency's infrastructure to survive or dominate the music industry. This unparalleled level of industry respect and external networking power makes him practically bulletproof against internal corporate pressure, leaving the executives acutely aware that they are dealing with a self-made mogul rather than an expendable employee. But perhaps the most jaw-dropping, awe-inspiring act of utter defiance against the corporate standard was Yoongi's absolute insistence on embarking a grueling multi-continent solo arena world tour, a physical and emotional gauntlet that made him the very first member of BTS to single-handedly sell out massive stadiums and arenas across the globe without the protective shield of his bandmates or the hyper-choreographed backing track-heavy safety nets typical of agency-produced idol concerts. Corporate tour directors were reportedly stunned when Yoongi demanded a live rock band, completely live raw vocals, and a stage design that literally deconstructed itself piece by piece as the show progressed, physically mirroring his own psychological exhaustion and artistic vulnerability. Every single night on that tour, fans didn't watch a pristine pop idol effortlessly execute synchronized routines. They watched a true tortured rock star scream his lungs out, sweat through his clothes, dramatically collapse on stage, and violently drag himself across the floor, delivering a performance so viscerally agonizing and spectacularly real that it made HYBE's typical perfectly polished tour packages look entirely soulless in comparison. In the final, tear-soaked nights of his Seoul encore concerts, as he broke down sobbing while performing his most painful tracks, surrounded by his brothers in the audience, he didn't just cement his status as a legendary performer, he cemented a terrifying reality for the corporate executives watching from their VIP boxes. They were forced to realize that Min Yoongi is a self-sustaining, entirely autonomous musical titan who can write, produce, direct, and perform at a world-class level without needing a single ounce of corporate creative direction, commanding millions not because of the massive HYBE branding stamped on his albums, but because of his bleeding, uncompromising authenticity, proving that no amount of corporate wealth, boardroom pressure, or algorithmic strategy can ever control or manufacture a true revolutionary artist. Number 3. Jimin, conquering the world while defying the system. When Park Jimin stepped into the global spotlight as an entirely independent solo force, the corporate architects at HYBE were suddenly confronted with an artistic evolution so deeply personal, physically demanding, and culturally unprecedented that it completely shattered their traditional marketing blueprints. For years, the agency had heavily capitalized on Jimin's breathtakingly ethereal stage presence, his angelic falsetto, and his contemporary dance elegance, often packaging him as the delicate, pristine prince of the vocal line, whose primary commercial appeal rested on charm and flawlessly synchronized performances. However, when the time came for Jimin to unveil his solo identity, he refused to hide behind the safety net of high-concept group lore or company-sanctioned pop formulas, instead diving headfirst into an intense, soul-bearing creative journey that left corporate managers completely stunned. His debut solo studio album, Face, was not an easily digestible compilation of radio-friendly, focus group-tested hits designed to casually feed algorithmic streaming playlists. Rather, it was a dark, intensely atmospheric, and emotionally turbulent reflection on deep isolation, self-doubt, and the psychological scars left behind during the global pandemic, laying bare the profound emotional toll of living under an unforgiving corporate microscope. The title track, Like Crazy, was a moody synth-pop masterpiece steeped in loneliness and intoxication, featuring bearing choreography and visual aesthetics that boldly deviated from the sanitized, family-friendly image corporate executives typically demand from top-tier idols. The internal corporate shock reached an absolute crescendo when Jimin made history by becoming the very first South Korean solo artist to conquer the coveted #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100 chart with Like Crazy, an astronomical, historic milestone achieved without the massive multi-million-dollar Western radio airplay campaigns, heavy commercial brand integrations, or mainstream American television push that the agency usually spends vast fortunes orchestrating for its crossover projects. Insiders noted that the sheer autonomy of Jimin's organic triumph caught HYBE completely flat-footed, highlighting an undeniable reality. The monumental organic devotion of his audience vastly outstripped the agency's conventional promotional machinery. But Jimin was far from done dismantling expectations. Instead of resting on his historic Billboard laurels or waiting for corporate guidance, he pushed his artistic boundaries even further with the release of his fiercely experimental second solo album, Muse, and the explosive title track, Who, where he completely reinvented his physical and vocal persona through intricate vintage-inspired hip-hop and R&B sensibilities, once again taking global streaming platforms with unmatched organic dominance. Beyond his music, Jimin completely rewrote the rulebook for high-fashion brand ambassadorships, effortlessly securing historic, record-breaking partnerships with luxury powerhouses like Dior and Tiffany & Co., without allowing the corporate agency to dilute his personal authenticity or force aggressive artificial product placements into his artistic content. Even his decision regarding military service was an emotional, unified statement of defiance against corporate convenience. By enlisting alongside Jungkook as active-duty soldiers, Jimin prioritized brotherhood, solidarity, and personal integrity over corporate requests to stagger enlistments for prolonged solo commercial exploitation. By achieving unprecedented historic global records entirely through his raw, unfiltered talent, profound emotional vulnerability, and sheer work ethic, Jimin fundamentally proved to HYBE's executive boardroom that his immense cultural dominance does not depend on corporate packaging, solidifying his status as a self-made global icon who commands the world entirely on his own terms. Number 2. V. The vintage rebel who rewrote the high-fashion blueprint. When examining the sheer, unadulterated friction between the aggressively modernized, heavily digitized, algorithmic pop machinery of HYBE Corporation and the fiercely independent artistic souls of its biggest global stars, Kim Tae-hung, globally idolized as V, stands out as an utterly fascinating, profoundly stubborn enigma who completely dismantled the conventional idol playbook by simply refusing to conform to the relentless pace of the hyper-capitalist K-pop industry. For nearly a decade, corporate executives and top-tier marketing directors had heavily capitalized on V's breathtakingly symmetrical visuals, his deeply resonant baritone voice, and his undeniable status as a global it boy, constantly pushing him toward standard, easily digestible pop trends designed to casually feed viral TikTok dance challenges and appease demanding Wall Street shareholders who desperately craved another massive synthetic English pop smash. But behind the mesmerizing gaze and the immaculate high-fashion exterior lay the soul of a vintage romantic, an old-school jazz aficionado, and a remarkably stubborn artist who fundamentally despised the artificial, heavily manufactured, factory-line approach to music production that the company had painstakingly normalized. When it came time to completely unleash his solo identity upon the world, Tae-hung did not walk down the predictable, company-approved path of hiring standard, safe, in-house HYBE producers. Instead, he orchestrated an absolute corporate earthquake by actively seeking out and personally hiring Min Hee-jin, the fiercely independent, highly polarizing, and undeniably brilliant former CEO of Adore, to serve as the ultimate creative director for his debut solo studio album, Layover. This singular, defiant decision was a massive, unprecedented power move that reportedly sent intense shockwaves of panic and frustration rippling through the highest echelons of HYBE's executive boardroom, especially as a vicious, incredibly messy, and highly publicized corporate civil war later erupted between HYBE's top brass and Min Hee-jin herself, effectively placing V right in the crosshairs of a massive multi-billion-dollar legal and public relations battle. Yet instead of quietly retreating or apologizing to the corporate overlords, Tae-hung fiercely stood by his deeply personal artistic choices, proving that his loyalty lies strictly with genuine artistic synergy rather than the ruthless, heavily politicized corporate hierarchy. Layover was an absolute masterpiece of quiet rebellion. While other artists were pushed by the agency to release high-energy, heavily auto-tuned club bangers, V deliberately stripped away every single layer of synthetic K-pop polish, delivering a stunning, nostalgically rich, profoundly melancholy R&B and jazz album that practically demanded the listener to slow down, breathe, and reflect, completely defying the algorithm's insatiable demand for quick dopamine hits. He even put his beloved rescue dog, Yeontan, on the official album cover and physically brought him onto national television music shows, a heartwarming, deeply personal gesture that effectively mocked the hyper-curated, overly serious manufactured perfection that K-pop agencies typically demand from their top-tier idols. By prioritizing raw emotional ambiance, cinematic retro aesthetics, and deeply soulful vocal performances over manufactured hype and standard choreography, V proved that he didn't need the company's aggressive multi-million-dollar marketing gimmicks to sell millions of records. His raw, unadulterated authenticity was infinitely more valuable than any corporate strategy. But his quiet, devastating rebellion against HYBE's suffocating control extended far beyond his musical choices and directly into the glamorous, fiercely competitive realm of global high fashion and luxury brand ambassadorships, where K-pop agencies usually exert massive, suffocating control over their artists' contracts to secure lucrative corporate kickbacks. Tae-hung effortlessly transcended the standard idol treatment by securing incredibly prestigious, historic global campaigns with absolute luxury titans like Celine and Cartier, casually flying to Paris, commanding massive crowds, and literally shutting down entire city blocks just by merely existing, all while operating with a level of effortless, untouchable autonomy that left HYBE's public relations managers completely redundant. He wasn't just a corporate brand ambassador reading a heavily vetted script, he was a global fashion icon dictating his own terms, completely independent of the agency's overarching umbrella. Furthermore, as the inevitable, heavily scrutinized reality of mandatory South Korean military service approached, a period that HYBE executives famously dreaded and repeatedly tried to heavily politicize and leverage in frantic shareholder meetings to stall for time and prevent catastrophic stock market crashes, V delivered perhaps the most jaw-dropping, awe-inspiring, and terrifyingly brave plot twist of his entire career. Instead of opting for a relatively safe, quiet public service position or a standard military band assignment that would conveniently preserve his flawless, heavily insured flower boy aesthetic for future commercial exploitation, V completely shattered the delicate idol illusion by voluntarily applying and getting accepted into the remarkably elite, grueling, and highly dangerous special duty team of the Capitol Defense Command, a notoriously tough counter-terrorism unit tasked with extremely perilous missions, close-quarters combat, and high-stakes military policing. This sheer grit, physical endurance, and absolute fearlessness required to survive this brutal, specialized training completely dismantled the company's heavily manicured soft boy narrative, forcing corporate executives to nervously watch their most aesthetically prized asset willingly endure intense physical hardship, rappel down massive buildings, and train with live ammunition in grueling conditions. This bold, uncompromising decision fundamentally proved that Kim Tae-hung is not a fragile corporate doll to be carefully preserved on a shelf for future profit. He is a fiercely resilient, profoundly courageous man who absolutely refuses to let a profit-hungry corporation dictate the parameters of his masculinity, his patriotism, or his personal growth. The intense corporate anxiety surrounding his profound independence flared up again recently when incredibly messy, malicious online rumors surfaced, fueled by corporate warfare, accusing V of receiving special military privileges simply because he sent a heartfelt birthday text message to his former collaborator Min Hee-jin just days after enlisting, leading to an absolutely absurd, highly publicized formal investigation by the Ministry of National Defense. While corporate vultures desperately tried to use this trivial incident to drag his pristine name into the mud of their ongoing boardroom battles, the military completely cleared him of any wrongdoing, firmly stating that he strictly followed all communication guidelines during his approved weekend hours, effectively silencing the malicious noise and proving that even in the middle of a massive multi-billion-dollar corporate crossfire, Tae-hung's integrity remains absolutely bulletproof. By continuously, stubbornly, and beautifully refusing to bow down to the high-pressure demands of a relentless, profit-maximizing K-pop empire, choosing instead to fiercely protect his beloved vintage soul, his unparalleled artistic autonomy, his deep personal loyalties, and his unwavering honor, Kim Tae-hung has definitively shown the entire world that a true, transcendent artist can never be chained by a corporate contract, leaving HYBE's executives to silently realize that they can never truly own the brilliant, untamable spirit of V. Number 1. Jungkook, the golden maknae who sabotaged the corporate machine. When we talk about the ultimate, unadulterated power struggle between the sanitized, heavily regulated, multi-billion-dollar corporate machinery of HYBE and the raw, untamed artistic autonomy of its artists, absolutely no one embodies this explosive tension more spectacularly than Jungkook, the indisputable golden maknae and the most formidable pop titan on the planet. For over a decade, the massive corporate entity painstakingly crafted and furiously protected his pristine image as the innocent, obedient, and profoundly talented youngest member, molding him into the ultimate flawless idol prototype designed to capture hearts, break algorithmic streaming records, and casually generate hundreds of millions of dollars in effortless revenue. The executive boardroom expected him to perpetually remain their compliant golden boy, safely churning out heavily sanitized, family-friendly pop anthems that would easily appease demanding conservative shareholders and aggressively monetize the massive, fiercely loyal global fan base without ever rocking the boat. However, as the highly anticipated second chapter of his career dawned, Jungkook completely shattered this delicate, heavily insured corporate illusion by systematically dismantling every single expectation placed upon him, morphing into a fearless, autonomous, unapologetically explicit global rock star who refused to be chained by the agency's suffocating purity standards. The first massive shockwave to rattle HYBE's executive towers was his absolute refusal to hide his personal rebellion. He boldly covered his entire right arm in heavy, intensely personal tattoos and acquired multiple prominent facial piercings, physically destroying the conventional, flawless K-pop aesthetic that the company heavily relied upon to sell an unattainable fantasy. When it came time to launch his monumental solo debut with the historic, record-shattering smash hit 7 and the subsequent explosive R&B banger 3D, corporate marketing directors likely envisioned a safe, charmingly romantic promotional campaign, but Jungkook completely blindsided them by actively choosing to embrace wildly explicit, sexually mature, and boldly provocative themes that sent conservative Korean media outlets into an absolute frenzy. He wasn't just subtly shedding his boyish image, he was aggressively setting it on fire, proudly releasing explicit, unfiltered versions of his tracks that completely bypassed the standard, heavily censored K-pop broadcasting regulations, fundamentally proving that his unparalleled global dominance did not require the protective, sanitized safety net of the agency's traditional PR playbook. But his artistic rebellion was merely the tip of the iceberg compared to the chaotic, beautiful, and utterly unscripted psychological warfare he waged against HYBE's frantic media control team through his legendary marathon Weverse live broadcasts. While standard K-pop idols are strictly trained to only go live for heavily scripted, meticulously monitored 20-minute sessions with managers aggressively hovering off-camera to prevent any PR disasters, Jungkook violently threw the corporate rulebook out the window. He would casually fire up his camera at 3 in the morning without any prior company authorization, drinking high-end whiskey or beer, drunkenly singing karaoke for hours, folding his laundry, and openly crying while deeply analyzing his own emotional vulnerabilities, completely stripping away the artificial, heavily manicured barrier between the untouchable global superstar and the ordinary human being. In one incredibly historic and hilarious incident that practically gave corporate executives a collective heart attack, he casually warned his audience, "If I fall asleep like this, the company will go crazy," and then proceeded to do exactly that, literally falling sound asleep on his bed while leaving the live broadcast running for 20 minutes, as over 6 million bewildered, highly amused fans essentially watched him snore. Behind the scenes, frantic staff members were desperately blowing up his phone, frantically trying to shut down the broadcast remotely to protect their highly valued asset from the absolute unpredictability of an uncontrolled live feed. But Jungkook's blatant disregard for their corporate anxiety proved that he was completely untouchable, essentially turning the agency's strict monitoring protocols into an absolute laughingstock. However, the most definitive, earth-shattering moment of Jungkook's ultimate rebellion against HYBE's corporate greed occurred during the incredibly messy, highly publicized, and vicious corporate civil war between HYBE and Adore's former CEO Min Hee-jin, a massive boardroom dispute that threatened to completely destroy the careers of the younger labelmate girl group New Jeans. While the entire multi-billion-dollar conglomerate was locked in a bitter, ruthless PR battle, aggressively trying to control the media narrative and demanding absolute silence and loyalty from its roster of artists, Jungkook courageously stepped directly into the massive crossfire. In an unprecedented, deeply shocking display of immense industry power and unwavering moral integrity, he took to his dog Bam's dedicated Instagram account, which boasts millions of followers, and boldly posted a picture accompanied by 5 colored hearts representing the New Jeans members, explicitly captioned with the powerful, defiant statement, "Artists are not guilty." This single fearless post was an absolute nuclear bomb dropped directly into the laps of HYBE's top executives, instantly shattering the company's carefully constructed narrative and publicly condemning the ruthless corporate machine for using young artists as disposable shields in their greedy, ego-driven power struggles. Panic immediately erupted within the agency's public relations department, forcing them to frantically scramble to confirm that the post was indeed a deliberate act of solidarity, awkwardly admitting defeat because they simply could not afford to reprimand or silence the most powerful, lucrative pop star in their entire massive empire. By weaponizing his immense, untouchable platform to bravely defend vulnerable junior artists against his own deeply powerful employer, Jungkook proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that his loyalty lies strictly with justice, genuine artistry, and basic human decency, rather than the ruthless, profit-maximizing directives of a boardroom full of greedy executives. Finally, instead of allowing HYBE to fully maximize and milk his monumental solo momentum for prolonged, staggered commercial exploitation, he chose absolute brotherhood and solidarity by intentionally cutting his historic solo era short to enlist as an active-duty combat soldier directly alongside Jimin, completely refusing to let the corporation dictate his personal timeline or separate him from his beloved bandmates for the sake of quarterly financial reports. Jungkook didn't just break the rules, he completely rewrote them, fiercely establishing that no matter how massive, powerful, or aggressively controlling the HYBE empire becomes, they will never ever be able to control the brilliant, beautifully chaotic, and unyielding spirit of the golden maknae, leaving the corporate executives to silently seethe in the terrifying realization that he holds the ultimate power over his own legendary destiny, forever shattering the illusion that the creator is lesser than the corporation. The golden maknae essentially weaponized his own unprecedented success, turning every single attempt at corporate suppression into a monumental victory for artistic freedom. This profound evolution from a heavily protected corporate asset into a rebellious, deeply compassionate, and autonomous cultural phenomenon is exactly why HYBE can never truly reign over BTS, because they are no longer just artists, they are untouchable titans who have completely outgrown the very empire they painstakingly built from the ground up.